Welcome once again to Channel 514 and SPK Plus, and this will be the fifth episode of our series Exploring Ancient Literature, and it will be the last in our series within this series on the literature of ancient Mesopotamia. So, the greatest Mesopotamian classic of them all is the one that we're going to be discussing this time, tonight. And it is, of course, the Epic of Gilgamesh. Now, last time we talked about the Sumerian poems on which the epic tradition is based, but this time we're going to get right into the epic itself, and its history, its rediscovery in 1853 and following, and on its long-term legacy in history. Now, first of all, I'm going to summarize and describe the actual plot of the epic, but let me preface that summary by saying a few words about the different versions of the epic. So, again, the semi-legendary king and hero Gilgamesh probably lived in the 28th century or so BC, and was the king of the city-state of Uruk in lower Mesopotamia in what is known as Sumer. Now, this Sumerian king was remembered as the quintessential hero and of his civilization, and his adventures were told and retold over countless generations, so century after century after century. So when they started to write longer, more grand and ambitious works about his adventures, many different versions arose. So you have one epic really, but in countless versions, and the two, I should say, that are best known and perhaps most influential, although I don't really know that for a fact, are what is known as the Old Babylonian Version, or OBV, and the Standard Version, or SV. So what I'm going to be summarizing here is the Standard Version. And the texts that we have of the Standard Version are mainly those rediscovered in 1853 at the palace of one of the great kings of the Neo-Assyrian kingdom, one of their kings named Ashurbanipal. I'm not sure if he was the first or the second or whatever, because there were more than one with that name. But these tablets were discovered in the remains of his royal library, and what we don't have from those tablets can be supplied in many cases from other tablets that have been discovered in other places. So we supplement the Standard Version from the Old Babylonian Version or from another version, even notably a Hittite version, which was actually written in prose, which was not common in the ancient Near East. And so that should give you an idea of how enduring and how widespread this tradition was. Now, the Old Babylonian version was probably written in the 18th century BC, whereas the Standard Version probably dates to the late 2nd millennium or early 1st millennium BC. So, that being said, I'm going to get into summarizing the text, and again, this is the Standard Version that we're going to be summarizing, and it's from Andrew George's 1999 translation, which I've used many times already on Channel 514 in different presentations. So, again, these Mesopotamian classics are often referred to by their incipit, by the first few words. And in this case, that would be, "He who saw the deep." That's usually how it's, some version of that, some translation of that, whatever it is in the Akkadian. I don't know Akkadian. It's usually something like that, "He who saw the deep." And so what I'm going to do first is just read the first few stanzas. Here it's rendered in stanzas. So I'll read the really the overture to the epic. Beginning. He who saw the deep, the country's foundation, who knew, was wise in all matters. Gilgamesh, who saw the deep, the country's foundation, who knew, was wise in all matters. He, everywhere, and learnt of everything the sum of wisdom. He saw what was secret, discovered what was hidden. He brought back a tale of before the deluge. He came a far road, was weary, found peace, and set all his labors on a tablet of stone. He built the rampart of Uruk the sheepfold, of holy Eanna the sacred storehouse. See its wall like a strand of wool, view its parapet that none could copy. Take the stairway of a bygone era, draw near to Eanna, the seat of Ishtar the goddess, that no later king could ever copy. Climb Uruk's wall and walk back and forth. Survey its foundations, examine the brickwork. Were its bricks not fired in an oven? Did the 7 sages not lay its foundations? A square mile is city, a square mile date grove, a square mile is clay pit, half a square mile the temple of Ishtar, 3 square miles and a half is Uruk's expanse. See the tablet box of cedar, release its clasp of bronze, lift the lid of its secret, pick up the tablet of lapis lazuli, and read out the travails of Gilgamesh, all that he went through. So what follows after this is a description of how mighty and heroic this hero Gilgamesh is, and after that we find that he has become an affliction to his people. It says here, the young men of Uruk he harries without warrant. Gilgamesh lets no son go free to his father. By day and by night his tyranny grows harsher. And it also seems, in the following stanza or two, that he is insisting on some kind of prima noctem, or some kind of rite of the first night with the young women of his kingdom. And so the people are crying out to the gods to somehow relieve them of the depredations and the harsh exactions of their king. And so what do the gods do? They decide to make a powerful rival for Gilgamesh. And so they get together and they create a powerful wild man. And he's called Enkidu. And he is set down on the earth in the wilderness of Sumer, somewhere near the city-state of Uruk. And so a hunter comes and visits the city and complains that there's a dangerous wild man in the area who is freeing the animals from his traps, because this wild man lives among the animals, so he's their friend and he frees them from the traps. And so won't the king do something about this? And so there is a conference among Gilgamesh and the notables of Uruk, and what do they decide? They decide that the priestess of Ishtar, the Shamhat, is going to have to go to this wild man and use her charms, to bring him around and civilize him, and so bring him back to the city and make him human. And so let me just make sure I'm following everything just right here, because it's easy with something like this to put things out of order, really. But she does this, actually. She goes out there and she's successful in bringing Enkidu around, and immediately, he lies with her, and she teaches him about about a civilized way of life. And before this, he's not even able to understand language or anything, but now he becomes fully human, and he wants to go back to the city and stop Gilgamesh from being so tyrannical, because he has a moral sensibility that this bothers him, that the king is being tyrannical. I'm sorry, my phone is very unexpectedly ringing, so I am going to see who it is, but it's probably nothing. Hello? So that was some kind of recorded message in Spanish, so obviously that wasn't for me. Anyway, and I'm dropping this book. But, so when they come back to, well, as the priestess is talking to Enkidu, she informs him that Gilgamesh had had a dream and had gone to talk to his mother about it, and the dream had foretold that this powerful man would come and that the two would become friends. Although at first it would seem like they were going to be enemies, you know. So Enkidu and the priestess, they come back to the city, and um, it seems like maybe they're going to, they come to, they struggle with one another, and at first it seems you're wondering, oh, who's going to win, um, but the result is that they become friends, So after this, they decide that what they're going to do, since now that they're together, no one can stop them because they're both so powerful, is that they're going to go to the cedar forests of Lebanon and slay this monster Humbaba, who is the guardian of the cedar forest, because this forest has the best wood anywhere, and no one is supposed to cut it, and the monster is supposed to stop anyone from trying to take the wood. And so they set out on their way, and Gilgamesh has a series of dreams on the way, which seem to him to mean that they're doomed, that their mission is doomed, and they're going to perish. And each time Enkidu interprets the dream for him and tells him that it actually means they're going to succeed. And so in this passage, there's a strong theme of friendship and working together, and how these two men are at the height of their powers, and so they're going to succeed in this as long as they're very determined and they stick together. So they're able to overcome the monster, and the monster actually pleads with them and tries to trick them in order to get them to spare him. But of course they kill the monster, and they take the wood, and they use it to build a doorway for a temple. And so after this, let me just flip ahead a little and make sure I'm not missing anything. Okay. So the goddess Ishtar now is so taken with what Gilgamesh has succeeded in doing, and his heroism, that she wants him to lie with her. She wants him to become one of her lovers, because the goddess was understood as believed to be a prolific lover, and there were lots of stories about her, sort of folktale-like stories in which she has a romance with a different kind of animal, or with a legendary person in the past, or with a god, one of her fellow gods. And so each time it goes badly, of course, it always, it ends up very badly for the person who's involved with her. And so Gilgamesh makes a speech to her when she approaches him, saying, recounting all of the stories of her affairs that ended so badly. And so he kind of reproaches her with her misadventures, or her wrongdoing, or how she's just, bad news. And some people, some scholars, and some people in the world of popular fiction, like there's a fictional, version of this written as a novel actually, and in this, well, I'll just say there's one way of interpreting this passage as saying that Gilgamesh, because he's the king of the city, he's supposed to go to bed with the priestess of Ishtar, and in order to ensure fertility or something like that. And he, for whatever reason, doesn't want to do it. Apparently, he thinks that that's a bad deal for him somehow. So he doesn't want to, and of course the goddess has ways of punishing humans, and just like, well, not just like, but as you see in other mythological schemes, the gods can be vindictive and cruel when people hurt their feelings or offend them or just irritate them in some way. And so she begs her father Anu, the sky god, to send down this thing called the Bull of Heaven. And you can imagine that in a lot of different ways. A bull, that's somehow more than just a bull, that is a celestial being that can wreak havoc and destruction on the earth. And so her father sends the bull down, and they're hoping that will put paid to Gilgamesh and Enkidu, but of course these two friends are really at the height of their powers, and there's just no stopping them at this time, and so they're able to kill the bull. And Ishtar gets her revenge by causing Enkidu to get sick, and as he's lying sick, he reflects back on the things that they had accomplished, that he and his friend had accomplished, and he curses them all one by one, saying, "Oh, I curse the door that we made out of the cedar wood, and the priestess who taught me to be a civilized person, I curse her, and one of the gods, though, I'm not sure if it's Shamash, the sun god, or someone else, but they reproach him, saying that it's not the fault of all these things that he's lying sick, and so he takes it all back. He blesses all these people and all these things that he's just cursed, but he is done for, and he dies. And so Gilgamesh then is really horror-stricken and in great pain over his friend's death, and he can't come to terms with it, even even a little, And so he sits and sort of keeps vigil by the body of his friend until, as it says in one passage somewhere, until a maggot fell from his nose. So until the body is already decaying and there are maggots in it, he's just sitting there with it, and he won't leave it, and he won't allow the body to be taken away or buried or anything. But then they have an elaborate funeral, and so now that Gilgamesh is alone, and he has this problem that he's terrified of the prospect of death, and he misses his friend. So he's going to go on a quest, and he's going to try and find some solution to his problem. So at the beginning of the 9th tablet, which in this translation has a title, not an original title, but a title that or it's not original to the epic itself, but the translator has given it this title, The Wanderings of Gilgamesh. So it begins like this: For his friend Enkidu, Gilgamesh did bitterly weep as he wandered the wild. I shall die, and shall I not then be as Enkidu? Sorrow has entered my heart. I am afraid of death, so I wander the wild, to find Utanapishti, son of Ubartutu. On the road, traveling swiftly, I came one night to a mountain pass. So, what he's looking for, and I mentioned this in the 3rd study in our 10-part series, Because of You or Just Because, He's looking for Utanapishti, who's the man who survived the flood. He's the Noah figure of our story. Um, and as I mentioned in that study, it's a very common misconception that what the Epic of Gilgamesh is the Babylonian or Mesopotamian version of the flood story in Genesis. And that's completely untrue. There actually is a flood story, and we'll get to that point. But it's really not all that, in itself, it's really not an important element in the plot of the epic. And again, like I said before, the epic is about this man, this king who has adventures, and then his friend dies and he's afraid of death, and so he goes on a quest to find out some kind of secret to undying life or immortality. Now, there's a lot of adventures that he has on this quest, and so I'm probably going to end up garbling a few of them or transposing them, but I'm just going to do my best with this. So he meets some lions. He kills. You know, he gets more and more haggard and ragged, and wears the skins of animals, and is weathered by sun and wind and all that. And there are a lot of depictions of Gilgamesh in ancient art, holding a lion or fighting a lion or something like that. So he, every time he meets someone, they say something like this: "O Gilgamesh, where are you wandering? The life that you seek you never will find." Because, of course, he's hoping to find some kind of secret to immortality, and he really has to take this journey to find it, or to find out that he can't get it. But, of course, everyone that he meets tells him that this is crazy and impossible. And that happens again and again. So he finds out that to get to where, he finds out from the sun god that to get to where the, I think he finds out from the sun god, but he finds out that to get to the place where the Noah guy, where Utanapishti lives, he has to get to basically the other side of the world. He has to go through a tunnel that the sun goes through when it's done with its journey. So at the end of the day, the sun goes underground through a tunnel, and so Gilgamesh has to go through this tunnel to get to the other side, where he can get to a big sea that he can hopefully get across to this island really far away where Utanapishti lives. So it sounds like an impossible quest, really, and that's part of the point of this part of the epic. And so when he gets to... he first has this conversation about where are you wandering and the life that you seek you never will find. He first has this conversation with the sun god Shamash. And then when he gets to the mountains, Mashu's twin mountains, which daily guard the rising sun, whose tops support the fabric of heaven, whose base reaches down to the netherworld, when he gets to these mountains, where the gate of this tunnel is that goes under the earth, it says, there were scorpion men guarding its gate, whose terror was dread, whose glance was death, whose radiance was fearful, overwhelming the mountains. At sunrise and sunset they guarded the sun. And so he has a conversation with these two beings, the scorpion men, and they end up letting him go through the tunnel. So it's a long way, of course, and it's very dark, and it's put very dramatically. At 5 double hours the darkness was dense, and light was there none. It did not allow him to see behind him. At 8 double hours he was hurrying. The darkness was dense, and light was there none. It did not allow him to see behind him. And so on, until finally, with the sun bearing down on him, and time almost run out, because of course the sun has to use this tunnel too, he finally gets to the other side. And so now he's at the edge of the world, and that's the title that our translator gives to the 10th tablet, At the Edge of the World. So, the first person he meets on the other side is this character named Shiduri, it says, Shiduri was a tavern keeper who lived by the seashore. There she dwelt in an inn by the seashore. Pot stands she had, and vats all of gold. She was swathed in hoods and veiled with veils. So there's this mysterious lady running an inn at the edge of the world, and it's thought that probably she represents some goddess or some kind of supernatural being, but there's no need to really develop that idea here. But they have the usual conversation about where he's going and why he's got to do this, and she explains to him where he's got to go. He's got to cross the waters of death, and there's a boatman who is always crossing the waters, and he's the only one who can get him across. So she explains it like this. Said the tavern keeper to him, to Gilgamesh, O Gilgamesh, there has never been a way across, nor since olden days can anyone cross the ocean. Only Shamash the hero crosses the ocean. Apart from the sun god, who crosses the ocean? The crossing is perilous, its way full of hazard, and midway lie the waters of death, blocking the passage forward. So besides, Gilgamesh, once you have crossed the ocean, when you reach the waters of death, what then will you do? Gilgamesh, there is Ur-Shanabi, the boatman of Utanapishti, and the stone ones are with him, as he picks a pine clean in the midst of the forest. Go then, let him see your face. If it may be done, go across with him. If it may not be done, turn around and go back. So now, he sees the end of his journey is kind of coming into sight. So he goes to the edge of this sea, the waters of death, and he meets the stone ones. Sometimes it's translated as the stone things, but these are sort of golems or some kind of stony creatures that are able to row the way across the waters of death, because you can't touch the waters of death. So for some reason he gets in a fight with the stone ones and he destroys them. So now the boatman, Ur-Shanabi, he doesn't like this. He has the conversation with Gilgamesh that everyone else has about where is he going. And then he says, Your own hands, O Gilgamesh, have prevented your crossing. You smashed the stone ones, threw them in the river. The stone ones are smashed, and the pine is not stripped. So he says, go into the forest and make 300 punting poles, each 5 rods in length. Trim them and furnish them each with a boss, then bring them here into my presence. So he's got to go and cut more punting poles to paddle their way, or punt their way across the water. And because it's the waters of death, it destroys the poles one by one, so that's why you need 300 of them. They're just going to be eaten away by the waters. And so he's got to strip them, furnish them each with a boss, so each one's got to be made specially. And so they're on their way across. You can see it says, Set 2, O Gilgamesh. This is the boatman talking. Set 2. Take the first punting pole. Let your hand not touch the waters of death, lest you wither it. Take a second punting pole, Gilgamesh, a third and a fourth. Take a 5th punting pole, Gilgamesh, a 6th and a 7th. Take an 8th punting pole, Gilgamesh, a 9th and a 10th. Take an 11th punting pole, Gilgamesh, and a 12th. So, eventually they use them all. And what can he do then? It says, Gilgamesh stripped off his garments. With arms held aloft, he made a yard arm. So he kind of makes a sail, and that's the only way to get them the rest of the way across. So now he gets to the place where the guy who survived the flood lives with his wife. And so the reason they're still alive is that after they survived the flood, the gods got together and made these two people, nobody else, just the two of them, immortal. So, of course, Gilgamesh is hoping there's some secret to it, and this guy can tell me. But when he gets there and explains his situation to Utanapishti, like he's done with everyone else up to this point, um, Utanapishti goes ahead and tells his story of the flood. So, what happens, of course, is something similar to, but not identical to, what you find in Genesis. Utanapishti is a righteous man, and the gods are tired of the noise that humankind creates, and so they're planning to drown everyone. So what they do is they warn Utanapishti to build a boat, and being a clever man, he tricks everyone around into helping him build the boat, and telling them that he's going on some kind of journey, and that somehow it's to their advantage to help him get going. But of course, by the time he closes up the boat and the flood begins, everyone finds out that, everyone realizes they've been tricked, but it's too late now because they're all going to be dead. So, so they are out there floating in the boat for a long time, and finally, the seventh day came. The gale relented, the deluge ended. The ocean grew calm that had thrashed like a woman in labor. The tempest grew still, the deluge ended. I looked at the weather, it was quiet and still, but all the people had turned to clay. The floodplain was flat like the roof of a house. I opened a vent. On my cheeks fell the sunlight. Down sat I knelt and I wept. Down my cheeks the tears were coursing. I scanned the horizons, the edge of the ocean. In 14 places there rose an island. So finally, they release birds, and one bird at a time, and waiting for the bird not to come back, and when the raven doesn't come back, they come out and offer a sacrifice, and then the gods arrive, and there's sort of a meeting among them, and eventually they make Utanapishti and his wife immortal. And so at the end of this, though, Utanapishti, having told his story, he explains to Gilgamesh, so you see, this was, to me, it was a special favor from the gods, so I didn't do it with, there was no secret to it, so I can't help you. So you're going to die. And so he challenges him then to go 6 days and 7 nights, as he says, without sleeping, to prove a point, of course. So Gilgamesh goes to, he sits down and he says, I can do this, so he sits down, he's going to stay awake for 6 days and 7 nights. But he's so tired, of course, that he, falls asleep right away. And Utanapishti makes a comment to his wife, saying, this guy, he wants to live forever, he can't even stay awake for 1 day. And to prove to our hero that he has slipped into a long sleep, what they do is they put a loaf of bread out next to him every day while he's sleeping. And he sleeps for several days, I forget exactly how long. But here's the part where he reveals it. When Gilgamesh wakes up, he says, Come, Gilgamesh, count me your bread loaves. Then you will learn the days that you slept. Your first bread loaf was all dried up. The second was leathery, soggy the third. The fourth flour cake had turned to white. The fifth had cast a mold of gray. Fresh baked was the sixth. The seventh still on the coals. And only then did I touch you. So you can see, the old bread is all moldy, and this one is just a little stale, and this one is still fresh, and I just woke you up just now. So you see, you were sleeping for a week. And so Utanapishti is ready to send Gilgamesh home. But I believe it's his wife that convinces him to do something more. So first they get him to clean up and put on nice new clothes and everything, but um, then he's getting ready to send him home, and his wife says, "Gilgamesh came here by toil and by travail. What have you given him for his homeward journey?" And so Uttanapishti relents, and it turns out he does know about a plant that can rejuvenate anyone who eats it. So he says, "There is a plant that looks like a box thorn. It has prickles like a dog rose, and will prick one who plucks it. But if you can possess this plant, you'll be again as you were in your youth." So it's to get to it, he has to sink himself to the bottom of the sea using stones, using weights, and then grab it and cut off the weights and come back up to the surface. So he's able to do that, actually, and he says, "This plant, Urshanabi, is the plant of heartbeat. With it a man can regain his vigor. To Uruk the sheepfold I will take it, to an ancient I will feed it, and put the plant to the test. Its name shall be Old Man Grown Young. I will eat it myself, and be again as I was in my youth." So they get on their way home, and of course they stop for the night. Gilgamesh found a pool whose water was cool. Down he went into it to bathe in the water. Of the plant's fragrance a snake caught scent, came up in silence, and bore the plant off. So, all is lost now. The plant has been, the mission could have been successful, and there could have been a way out of our predicament, but along comes this dumb snake and takes it, and when he sheds its skin as it does so, because it becomes young again. And so then Gilgamesh sat down and wept. Down his cheeks the tears were coursing. He spoke to Urshanabi the boatman. "For whom, Urshanabi, toiled my arms so hard? For whom ran dry the blood of my heart? Not for myself did I find a bounty. For the lion of the earth, the snake, I have done a favor. Now far and wide the tide is rising. Having opened the channel, I abandoned the tools. What thing would I find that served as my landmark, had I only turned back and left the boat on the shore?" So, "Oh no, all is lost. How are we going to get back home now?" is what he says, really. So, it turns out, though, that they're able to get back home. So Urshanabi, the boatman who crosses the waters of death, for some reason he comes all the way back to Gilgamesh's city with him. And then we have a really nice moment at the end. Returning to the city, returning to his civilization, Gilgamesh has a sense that he's part of something, and that this mission wasn't in vain, and that he's rediscovered something. So he says to the boatman, "O Urshanabi, climb Uruk's wall and walk back and forth. Survey its foundations, examine the brickwork. Were its bricks not fired in an oven? Did the 7 sages not lay its foundations? A square mile is city, a square mile date grove, a square mile is clay pit, half a square mile is the temple of Ishtar, 3 square miles and a half is Uruk's expanse." So, and that's the end. So you can see the ending is this part about, look at the city of Uruk, and it's so great, and aren't the bricks fired in an oven, and all of this, and this part is the temple, and this part is the pasture land, etc. So it ends as it began. It ends with pretty much the same statements that began the epic. So that's the end of our story. Now, as I said before, now that we're at the end of our story, I just want to say a few things to give us a little more perspective on the significance of this literature, because I think too often we get dazzled by this amazing flood story, and we want to think about how is that, what does that have to do with the account in Genesis and everything. But to me, this story, which I first encountered when I was probably 11 or 12, what's interesting about it to me is the two friends and the adventures that they have, and then the fear of death and the journey to find some secret to the problems of life, and then the big letdown at the end, and then the reconciliation and rediscovery of civilization and humanity at the end. So that's what I think is interesting about it. Now, as I said before, this story was told and retold over and over again for many, many centuries, probably from late in the third millennium BC until early, maybe sometime in the first millennium BC. Although I really couldn't tell you when. Although all the versions that we have are written in Akkadian, and the old poems are written in Sumerian. So that's all cuneiform. And at some point early in the first millennium BC, you get the Phoenician syllabary, and you get the alphabets that come out of that, the Hebrew and Arabic, and the Greek alphabet, the Roman alphabet. So a whole different writing system came in, and Hellenistic civilization came in with the conquests of Alexander the Great, etc., etc. So over time, this story was kind of overshadowed, and it never really made it all the way into classical civilization. So it was forgotten about for a long time and rediscovered in the 1850s in the library of Ashurbanipal, the Assyrian king. And over time, archaeologists and scholars have discovered more tablets, and so it's kind of made its way back into the popular consciousness after a long hiatus. But actually, even all that time, it was never really gone, because perhaps you've heard of something called the Alexander Romance, a series of legendary romances that are found in many cultures, really, in Iran and Turkey and around the Islamic world, and even in places like Wales and the medieval Western world, and of course back in the Hellenistic Greek world when these fictional or heroic romances about Alexander the Great were first written. And so in these stories, Alexander the Great, besides conquering a bunch of different lands, and being an illustrious king, he also has these adventures that are much like those of Gilgamesh. And he's always coming across different characters who try to remind him or get him to admit his mortality and be reconciled to it, but he just can't deal with it. And at one point he even goes down to the bottom of the sea, and and of course he's looking for some kind of secret to immortality, but in the end he dies, of course. But so actually, the Adventures of Gilgamesh, his quest for immortality, that lived on in the tradition of the Alexander Romance and all the legends associated with that. So it didn't actually die out completely, but it in its original forms, it went under the surface for a long time and only resurfaced in the mid and late 19th century and following. So let me think a moment if there's anything else really that I want to add to this that I haven't already said, either here or in another video. But if not, let's assume not, although I could show some pictures. Let's show some pictures. But by this time, I'd say we've done what we're going to do with the Mesopotamian classics, and as we continue this series, we'll be moving on into Egyptian literature. And we'll probably begin with the pyramid texts, because those are the really the earliest major thing, in Egyptian literature that's worth talking about. And we'll move along from there. And so it won't all be religious literature like the pyramid texts. More of it will be just more literary. The great poems of the Middle Kingdom and wisdom literature and the inscriptions of the kings and the romances from the Ptolemaic period and so on and so on. But let's see. There are some illustrations in here that are of our hero Gilgamesh, actually. Let me try and find some of the good ones. Here is a colossal human-headed winged bull from the palace of Sargon II, an Akkadian king. Or was he an Assyrian king? Well, an Assyrian king, 8th century BC, so when you think bull of heaven or something like that, that might be kind of like what is meant, but there's one in here that I'm thinking of in particular. Well, here's one. Here's one that's a depiction of Gilgamesh with two gods. So on either side of this frame, this rectangular frame in the middle, you have a representation of Gilgamesh, and then on the guy in the frame and then the guy over on the other side are both gods. And this is an impression from a cylinder seal, and it's actually Akkadian, so it's from the sometime between the mid 24th century BC and the early 22nd century BC. So much more ancient than the story the version of the story that I just recounted. And here's a very famous bas-relief of Gilgamesh holding a lion. This is kind of the one that's best known of them all, really. But you can see he's represented as colossal because that's supposed to be a lion that he's holding. And this is in the Louvre, and it dates to the 8th century BC. Is there anything else? Here's one. It's like that last one. It's sort of a mirror image with the same scene being shown on both sides. So it's Gilgamesh giving water to a bull. So it's on the left and the right. That's the same thing. He's giving water to a bull. Now, and that is from something called the Clerk Collection. So I'm guessing that's somebody's private collection, or it's in a museum somewhere. So those are the pictures I wanted to show. So again, soon we'll move on into Egypt, and now you've had a little tour of Mesopotamian literature and seen pretty much all the highlights that I think are worth seeing or worth discussing in a setting like this. So this turned out to be almost 50 minutes. I was hoping I could keep it as short as possible, but it is a big subject. But thanks for watching, and watch as much or as little as you like. And thanks very much again, and we'll be back. We'll be back at it very soon. So have a great weekend, and take care.